my dreams. As I look upon my life, there's a passion inside. Heaven knows I'm living my dream.
Good morning, Insights family, and welcome to another installment of Talk with Joan. I do have an announcement to make. Joan and Violet won't be with us today, but we have some great guests in their stead. So wherever they are, I hope they're having a wonderful, wonderful time. As you know, our Thursday conversations are fueled and filled with so much insights, and today will be no different. Today we're having a conversation, and the conversation is entitled Politics 101. Now, if you're anything like me, for example, you're not completely submerged in politics, and you are not completely hopeless. So I think everybody has to find their space on the spectrum, because we can't operate in extremes. We can't be in a position where we know absolutely nothing, and then on the other end you absolutely have to be in government to be qualified as having some kind of political acumen. So today our conversation is based on just that, becoming more familiar and becoming au fait with the things that are required for us to be politically responsible. I have some great guests. We have Leandra, who is representing the youth. I have Diana from the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission, and I have Lorato, who is a prolific political writer. We are going to have a fascinating conversation, and we are going to capacitate ourselves to do better, because certainly the times require that of us. I'm going to kick off with a quote that I feel so relevant. It's from William Clinton, and he says, citizenship in the 21st century requires more than just paying your taxes and voting occasionally, running for office. That even if you're never in political office, you have political responsibilities, you can make your society better and stronger. And so it's really that, South Africans. It is a challenge to become more responsible as citizens. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guests to you, and they're going to tell us a little bit more about who they are, what they do, and what makes them powerhouses in the industries and the spaces that they occupy. Diana, over to you. Please, don't you want to just, our first question to you would be, who are you and why do you do what you do?
Thank you very much, Leanne. My name is Diana Mola, as you've already said, and I work for the IEC South Africa. I'm emphasizing the South Africa part, because this is an institution that was established in terms of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. I work as the Regional Outreach Officer responsible or in charge of the city of Joburg. And I am based in Braamfontein, and which is our local office, like the municipal office. My job entails community development in terms of civic democracy, voter and balloting education. What we do is we go out and educate our communities, encouraging them to be part of the whole process, that engages civic responsibility, democracy activities, but not only democracy. I know people always talk about democracy. We emphasize on responsible democracy.
Yeah.
But also we outline our legal ambits with regards to elections. We also talk about balloting education, so that the communities get to understand the different electoral systems and the ballot papers that are going to be used, and also understand the format and the designs of those particular ballot papers. We do interact with political parties as well, because they also be in line. They need to behave in line with our legal ambits. And that's basically, in short, what we do: educating, developing, engaging, galvanizing people to participate in elections, which is the responsible thing to do.
It's good to know, and it's also important to note that you don't only work once every 5 years.
No, not at all. We've got an election cycle.
Yes.
We've got the pre-election period.
Yes.
This is the time where we're going to be planning, going to be arranging, getting the voters' roll in order, so that to make sure we don't disenfranchise voters to participate in election, maybe by way of omitting their names in the segment of the voters' roll. And that is part of our constitutional mandate.
Yeah.
We compile and maintain the voters' roll. We make sure that eligible voters, registered voters, appear on the segment and the correct segment of the voters' roll.
Yeah.
Because we source the information from the Department of Home Affairs. However, we also have to make sure that we get stations that are user-friendly, stations that are going to be accommodative of every kind and any kind of voter that is going to come into the stations. We make sure that they are accessible to the voters and are within the range of the voters where they live. This is before. And we also need to get election staff that are going to be working on the day of the elections. We give training to them, but not only that. Our key concern, it goes with the importance of having to enlighten our voters. It doesn't necessarily add value for people to just march to voting stations without an understanding as to what is it that they're going to do and why do they have to do it and when are they going to do that. But just as important that they go to stations with informed, pre-informed, informed decisions. And as well as political parties, we afford them stages to go and talk to the people, sell their manifestos. And that on its own, it's going to afford the voters to then decide as to who are they going to give the mark to. That's pre. During elections, of course, that's when we engage in the actual elections, giving contracts to people to work, and making sure that the voters now are completely revised, that they're completely correct, and to make sure that the contracts are given to, because we also lease the stations. We've done that already. And we allow the voters to vote. After voting, then we count the vote and we announce the outcomes of the elections.
And then just to give us an idea, how many voters are we talking about? Because it's quite a mammoth task, and without the numbers, you can't really, have a proper concept of it. How many numbers are we looking at when it comes to managing the voters?
In the previous elections, we had about 12 million people.
12 million
having
people
to participate in that. However, I must indicate that and I'm saying this with a bit of concern, that with every election that we conduct, numbers are going down, and that becomes a concern.
It does. We'll pick up on that just a minute.
So with each and every election, there would be different numbers. We have a number of people who are registered, but what concerns us mostly, it's not just the number of people who are registered to vote, but it's the number of people who come to vote, as well as the number of people who do not come to vote. I need to acknowledge, I must just acknowledge that yes, indeed, it is that democratic right, but we don't promote that. And I'm saying this not because I work for the IEC, but I say that again as a South African, to say it is our responsibility to go and participate in election. Let me just throw a scenario. Who would want to be interested in a country that the people of that country are not interested in?
And I think that's the question that we have to ask, and that's the question that I hope that we can venerate today. And yourself, Lorato, please tell our listeners who you are and what makes you tick.
Sure. No, thank you so much for inviting me again this morning. I am husband to Tumelo, a public servant for at least over 16 years now. And I'm a father of 3. I know I look 25, but I have a 21-year-old in university.
Oh
no ways.
I'm telling you. Yes.
Okay, so you will share the youth secret after this, right?
As long as you don't ask me about prime. Yes. Anyway.
Oh, that's quite a thing.
I love it.
Yes. So to feed my 3 kids, I run a PR agency. But what I do when I'm not paid, I'm the chairman of the Rivonia Cycle.
Okay.
And Rivonia Cycle is a think tank. And it talks to, and in fact, it's interesting that it segues to exactly what Diana was raising now around people opting out of elections. One of the things that we've charged ourselves with at the Rivonia Cycle has been around what kind of political culture does South Africa need for one to increase participation in democratic processes, and it's not just elections, right? Because and that's the other thing where ordinarily when people think about democracy, we almost just think about or politics. We think about the electoral politics.
Yes.
But of course, it's all encompassing, and as Diana's indicated, with the cycles of the elections, and again with our history. A lot of people having struggled before 1994, and civil society in particular, religious organizations, faith-based organizations deciding to put the foot off the pedal, allowing for politicians to take over. But we know now what that got us to, right? So one of the things that we do at the Rivonia Cycle is we have a program that we run. It's called Democracy Builder. and it's conversations that we have in communities, and ordinarily we then allow for people to ventilate why they are opting out of the electoral process in particular, but most importantly, what it would take for them to participate actively. And one of the interesting things that we then find out is that, and again, we then walk around with assumptions, right? One of the assumptions is that people are, we need a lot more civic education. But you realize when you have conversations with people that, in fact, people are informed. They are just disillusioned. They are just disgruntled. They are just feeling that a little bit hopeless. But when there are points where, as you connect with them, as you have conversations with them, they realize that, in fact, we should be participating more in what councils. And it is that kind of participation that is going to get us some results. That is going to talk to this accountability that we wish for. So now it's no longer just a thing that I wish for. It's something that I can actively activate and realize its results. So that's what.
That's powerful. And you know what you do? You strike a chord because you address what the fundamental issue is that they found. They are disillusioned because they don't think that they have power. But in fact, we have disempowered ourselves by disengaging to the extent that we have. And we're actually going to approach that as our first question. I just want to allow Leandra just to greet. She's a podcast favorite here, so she won't have to go into who she is. But from the youth's perspective, Leandra, how are you guys feeling as the young up-and-comings? You could possibly still be categorized as a millennial. What is your political vibe?
Sure, that word vibe.
So it was a broad spectrum one for you.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, I think I would still be considered youth because I'm under the age of 35, almost at 35, but not yet there. So I would still be considered youth. And I also engage a lot with the new generation, which is Gen Z, because in our church group, we've got Gen Zs coming up. And obviously, as the next generation, you would work with them, you would engage with them. And also as a podcast host, my podcast is geared towards millennials and Gen Zs. So to hear where they are and how they view politics is important, and it's interesting because obviously you know that they are the leaders of the future. It's an age-old saying that we know, but are they really? What kind of leaders are we building when we look at the next generation? Like for me, I am a active voter. I would say I've been voting since the age of eligibility. So I'm just putting it out there. IEC's in the house.
Oh, yes.
You can go check my records. I can show you my IDs. There's stamps in there.
Yes.
So I have been actively voting, but I know a lot of my peers, which are millennials, are not active voters, and they have opted out of voting. Then you look at Gen Z, and we've had discussions with Gen Z, and to them it's like they've got a strong voice socially and culturally.
Yeah.
But how are we marrying that? How are we reconciling that with politics? Because culture is upstream from politics. We know that the government holds a big mirror to society, right? And what do we see when we look into the mirror, which is our government? And I think that is where I come in, or that is how I view the vibe of politics at the moment with my peers and then with the generation that follows.
Yeah, no, it is a big deal. So some statistics that have been thrown out here. Only 12 million people voted. And it is one of the predominant goals of the IEC to galvanize the youth, she mentioned. And then I want to just quote Lorato. In an article that he had written for one of the magazines. And he says here, so this is a quote on why the youth or non-voters are disillusioned. He says, "I want to believe that all my fellow compatriots understand why it is essential to participate in the census every 10 years. Digging deep into the general sentiment on why people opt out and choose not to be counted in this year's census. It seems to be less about understanding, but more about grave concerns of misgovernance in our country." Now, for me, that's completely fair. It's because why should I vote? Because it goes nowhere. So we're gonna approach this question from the IEC and also from the political stance. What can we say to an attitude that says this?
I think it's very important that people do participate in elections. Number one, it is somewhat, as I indicated earlier on, that it's our civic responsibility, because I associate with a notion that says you need to be the change that you want to see. Be effective, play some part, play a role in having to change what you don't want to see and make it as effective as you'd want it to see. Number two, when you participate in election, you become party in the process of having to elect people who are then going to represent you. Remember, when you vote, you're giving the right to somebody to stand for you, to work for you, to represent you, to do what you believe that person is going to do for you. If you don't, then who else are you going to blame? It is also a process in having to hold somebody accountable. If I vote for you, I'm saying go and represent for me to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you don't do all those, then I've got the powers to come back to you and say, no. Why are you not doing them? What could be the reason for you not to do them? I've actually mandated you by a way of voting you to do things for me. And it really becomes sad, as Leandra said, that, when you look at the youth, they don't participate in that. And evidently, in terms of our stats, we forever do see numbers going down, especially with regards to the youth.
Should we not have a roadshow that introduces more conversation to school-going youth? Because by the time you're 18, which is the year of eligibility, you should be able to have some kind of political awareness. And I only say that because, the IEC is practically involved in maintaining the voters' roll, getting people registered. Should we not introduce these conversations younger?
Definitely. That's
like in schools.
That's exactly what you're doing. I think that's one of the things that I needed to indicate when we started the conversation, to say, what else do we do outside election years? We do voter education. I did in KDET. We do civic education. And this, we provide educational processes or engage in different methodologies. We go to schools. The IEC assistants, we have collaborated with the Department of Basic Education.
Yeah.
But not only that, basic education as a band, but we also go to higher education institutions as well, private institutions. In essence, we interact with different constituencies, and we have fortunately developed materials that are in line with the LO curriculum as well as social sciences from grade 1 up to grade 10. And this is informed by what is contained in their LO curriculum. And we made it as custodians of the elections to collaborate with them to make sure that whilst the schools do the theoretical part of it, then we come in and we engage in different methods. We, in most cases, even at the primary level, engage those learners in mock elections where we uphold our integrity, the integrity of the of the commission itself. Create real voting stations where you and I go and vote.
Well, that's dangerous. If my 11-year-old tells me that she has rights and she wants to vote, I don't think I'll be too enthusiastic about that. And what do you say about that, Lorato?
So perhaps let me start where I'm going to step on Diane's toe.
Yeah.
What it is that I believe organizations such as the IEC is doing wrong. They are not holding other respective government departments and agencies responsible.
Yeah, because it's team.
So if you are the election, if you run elections, you administer elections, you run voter education campaigns, and people are telling you that the reason we are opting out it is because we don't see civil service delivery. The IEC ought to tell the presidency that you are messing up.
Yeah.
The reason the numbers are dwindling, it is because you are messing up, jack up, right? But because sometimes they then depend on the same politicians, to give them money, or whenever there are budget votes and the likes, you then realize that it's a very delicate balance, right? Move it away from the elections. If you think about an agency such as the Competition Commission, right? So they do a market inquiry. They then find out that, we're being overcharged on one thing or the other. Or let's take something that is very practical, bread. You remember there was price fixing on bread, right? Yes. They find the milling companies. And people were not saying that you didn't do a good job. They were saying, we are not seeing that come to our pockets.
Yeah.
The bread is still high. You may have told us of the action that you have taken, but we are not seeing it. Another example, SARS. They tell us about how much money they collect every year. You and I are always, begrudgingly so paying tax.
Yeah, always.
Always, right? And the point is that if we keep on paying tax so much,
yes,
why is it that people are not jacking up? So it's almost SARS must do the same to say, we can't be collecting money and you guys mess it up.
Yes.
You go and buy PPE at exorbitant prices and the likes. And I think once we are able to get that, we will not have to have this conversation every time in school. My 21-year-old will only have to be spoken to us because they get it, right? Because they can see the value. You don't have to, you speak to them once and then but now we are now almost in this vicious cycle where I always have to remind him to say, dude, I know that you care about Prime, but you must care a little bit about your country as well.
Yes. Yeah, no, that is good. I think what you do recognize is that people have to develop I think it's a worldwide or nationwide thing where people are not taking responsibility. Yeah. We are not taking responsibility as citizens. We've kind of abdicated all our functions to our government. Our government hasn't delivered. We can't hold them accountable. So, and our response, ironically, is to abstain and throw our hands up in the air and say, well, then I'm not going to vote. But that's the last thing that we should be doing, throwing our hands up in the air and saying, I don't want to vote. I don't want to be part of this.
May I share a different perspective a little bit there? So if you think about the Ratepayers Association, right, where what they did was to say, when we pay to the municipality, we realize that you guys don't collect rubbish, you don't clean the sewers, and we are now going to, as a group, collect the money and then pay somebody to do that work.
Yeah.
Right. So I think people may not necessarily be completely sitting on their heads.
Yeah.
We're looking at alternative ways because we must still live in these communities.
Yeah.
And that is why people then say, for safety, we'll then gate the community.
No, it's true.
Right?
And you see a lot of that happening. You see residences pooling together and fixing the potholes because it affects their cars. You do see this, but it only happens in perhaps organized and affluent communities. But what about the people that are desperately in need of service deliveries like roads and stuff like that? Those are the people that we have to get them to vote. So what do we say to someone who considers themselves to be politically disengaged? What are the first things that they can do in terms of becoming a more responsible citizen? I find that, and this is just, I'll throw some of my feelings out or some of my learnings out, that people don't know who their ward councillor is, that they don't know where they are supposed to vote, that they don't have open communication with them, so that they can't engage on anything, which means every time there is a call for support, they can't show up and do that. So what are you guys seeing in terms of the political complacency, or what can we say to a citizen like that?
Maybe, Leanne, before I even respond to your question, let me, if you allow me, tap into
Yes, of course, you have a rebuttal there. Yes.
Yeah, I want to believe that we all know that as institutions, you somewhat have to operate within certain legal ambits. And that you talk to your either constitutional mandates, it to tap into your functions, it will tap into your responsibilities as an entity or as an institution.
Yeah.
And of course, anyway, I know this is one of the questions that we always come across to say, but why is it that you, the IC, you always call us to go and participate in elections? Then you vote for these people, and when these people don't do, or even parties don't do what they promise, you then lift your hands up and say there's nothing that we can do. Unfortunately, ours is to get the people to vote, announce the elections, then we hand over to those particular levels or spheres of government, either the National Assembly after they've actually compiled it, or the provincial legislature, or even the municipal council. And after handing over to them, then it becomes the responsibility of the National Assembly or the Parliament itself or the legislature and the municipal council. However, I need to also reiterate that when you participate in election, you somewhere establish a relationship with the people you voted for. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make, that we voted, then they must lead. We need to establish a relationship with the very people and not be voiceless. We should begin to take the responsibility of talking to them, holding them accountable instead of saying, we know it was going to happen anyway, it has been happening. There has to be a point of change. At some point, as citizens, we need to take a decision and say, now we become that change, that process of changing. I'm glad that he even made an example to say communities would then begin to see that things are not happening the way that they're supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And then they begin to make it happen for themselves. And that is civic responsibility. But also encouraging people that let it also not be confined to those smaller spaces. We've done it here, then let's then begin to come with mechanisms of expanding it. And I think the more we do it as the citizen, then we'll then begin to show those that have voted for that, you need to change your ways. Otherwise, if you don't do it, we're going to do it ourselves. At some point, then there won't be any need for you to be occupying the positions that you are occupying. And this speaks to the people who are disengaged, people who are disgruntled, to say, please don't withdraw your vote.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you withdraw it, you are actually giving the powers to those people who are doing what you don't want. Rather give your vote to somebody else that you believe that will indeed do something differently. It is for that reason that parties are given, even independents, because now we are also going to be involving the independent candidates with regards to the amendments that are now being put in place, that you'd rather give that vote to a person that you think that will be able to do differently. If you withdraw it, then you are actually disenfranchising yourself. You are disempowering yourself, because if you'd have given a vote to somebody else, maybe that person would make a difference. So we ask just to encourage people, participate in that, because then you add value in the process of decision making. You add value in choosing somebody that may be efficient in having to bring the change, but not only choosing somebody to bring you change, but establish the relationship that would assist in having to make sure that you implement those particular processes or bring that change that you want to see.
So Diana, on that point that you mentioned there, you were saying, as a rebuttal to what Lorato was saying, with regards to you are there to encourage voters, you are there to, get the votes, and then you hand over, right? So that begs the question then, how is, like, one of your questions here, Leanne, is understanding how South African politics works, because now there's someone in the comment section very rightfully saying, so the process is disconnected, is basically what they are hearing you say at the moment. So after you hand over, it's no longer your problem. Whatever happens just happens. That is how they interpret it, right? And then they go on to say here that we can't be paying twice. We pay rates and taxes, and then we must still make our own plan. So on that note of handover, can you explain to us how South African politics is structured? How does it work? How is it organized? Because maybe that is where the disconnect comes in, with civil society not understanding that process.
In fact, the process is not necessarily disconnected.
Okay.
It is a process, like you're saying. You start with the step, from this step you hand over to the next step, from this you go to the next step, from that you go to the next step. But what is of essence is, in the whole process, the majority are the citizens. Let's not lose touch in there. When you talk about democracy, you hear people reiterating, for the people, by the people, people. And the question is, who is these people? Who are these people? It's us as South Africans. And the IEC creates a platform to say, choose who you want, choose the person or the representative that will then make accountable, that even if the IC hands over to the level or the sphere of government, you then boldly stand up and say, I put you there. Okay. You need to account. You need to make sure that you do things for me, for us, as the people who voted for you. However, you don't even just hoy it to them and say, do it, but to say to them, I'm also here to contribute to the process. I'm also here to also make sure that I become part of the process of making sure that we achieve what we do. But that, you don't say lead and I stay back, but I'm saying I'm giving you a way, my mouth, to speak for me, because to make a contribution at the National Assembly in terms of decision making. You are there. We can't all be there, but you are representing us. And remember that those decisions, once you're making them, they should speak about me. They should represent me. They should address my need as a voter or as a citizen. Because when you go there, you are there because of my vote. So there's not necessarily disconnection of some sort. And whoever that are occupying their, whatever positions that they're occupying, they need to always be reminded that you are not there because you put yourself there. Had it not been of me, you wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking also, it's the type of people that are also in these municipal organizations. We are not necessarily electing that. We are highly dependent on how it is set up and the structure. And I think maybe a large chunk of the fault lies there. It's like, who are the people that are governing? You know, we depend on, when we pay our taxes and when we are responsible, law-abiding citizens, there's an expectation that we have. And I think the disconnect comes where our expectations are not met. You write an interesting article in IOL, and it is entitled, "When the Bar is Too Low, Citizens Applaud the Obvious." And I mean, it said everything that I wanted to say, but I just want to quote the situation. Lorato can speak a bit more about the context of this. But the crux of the matter is that we are applauding basic things like, oh, we have water. Oh, I can drive on a road. Oh, thank you so much, you know. But in fact, it is an expectation, a legitimate expectation that we have to have these services. So what can you share about that?
So the article was agitated by the Tshwane ya Tima, hashtag Tshwane ya Tima campaign. You remember in Tshwane, they ran a campaign to switch off the people, businesses and individuals that were not paying for their electricity.
Yes.
Right. And what I then did was I just went onto the act in terms of what are the responsibilities of council from a finance oversight point of view. Firstly, they're supposed to at least meet once a month, and when they meet, the finance manager, depending on the type of municipality, sometimes it's a CFO, sometimes it's a normal finance manager. They will then have to present their financial position.
Yeah.
It includes the amount of debt that they have, people who are defaulting, and what they are doing from a collections strategy. I then went and read that they actually have a collection strategy. Yeah. Which they had not been implementing.
Yeah, and they have one.
And I saw people who say, yeah, you must switch off. And I said, but let us sit back a little bit. There are officials who are sitting in offices who are paid to collect, or at least ensure that they implement this collection strategy, and they have not, right? Now they're sitting with at least about 120 days of debtors that they have not collected, and now they are owing Eskom. And remember, even the Tshwane ya Tima campaign, it was as a result of an 8 billion rands amount that Eskom had said that if you guys don't pay, we are going to switch the entire Tshwane off, right? So it was a lot more reactive. And it was out of that realization that maybe the politicians have figured us out.
Yeah.
They realized that you must just do a little bit, and these ones are satisfied. They're like, yeah, no, you've done your job.
Thank you.
And I guess it's again on us, where we then need to demand a little bit more from them to say, it is not good enough for you to be reactive. Yes. What are some of the things that you ought to do from a proactive point of view? But you can't do that unless you participate. Right, but we must also acknowledge that the four of us here, we likely to participate because the likelihood is that we can get home on time. So if an IDP meeting is hosted from 6 o'clock, we may have a helper who then takes care of the kids, prepares food for them.
Yeah, your life is
many
organized.
People do not have that.
Yeah,
right. So if the expectation is that they must participate, and yet they do not have that kind of support, it therefore means that we are putting, almost an unrealistic expectation on those people. And therefore, that is why they will then see that, but this thing is not working for me. And it is not working for them precisely because if they want to participate, they can't, because then who takes care of my child when I'm at the IDP meeting in the evening? Yeah. And I had been away from work for extended periods. So it's almost that type of, some of those things that we then need to think a little bit about. If you consider the State of the Nation address, for instance, remember it used to be in the day at 2 o'clock, and when President Jacob Zuma came and said, no, listen, people are at work in the day, let's have it at 6 o'clock in the evening. So it's almost that kind of rethinking and reimagination that we need to be looking at. You were talking about the youth earlier, to say, how do we keep the youth engaged? A lot of us even have professional meetings on WhatsApp. why is it that we have not moved onto digital platforms? We exist in small and many micro communities on digital platforms.
Yeah.
Why are we not optimizing on that? Of course, government is always behind the curve when it comes to many things, including digital. But I think those are the things that we need to agitate for, to say, go to where the people are and stop doing this thing of, we are here, you must come to us. And we'll tick a box and say, but we've done our job. We held a meeting, people did not pitch up, and we
we carried on. Yeah, and I'm just thinking how relevant it becomes the type of constitutional system that we have, and I'll tell you why, because it relates to the new amendment that has just been signed in. When was it? April.
Yes.
And if I just go to it, we can just share briefly what it was. But the point I'm making is that it seems like the system itself isn't working for us. The way people are elected, the way people are assigned power, the types of people that are doing the work. So the new amendment, which I'll allow you guys to speak more into, it allows for us to now choose people differently. Am I correct in saying that? So we can explain the situation beforehand and what problems that was causing and why this amendment is going to give us a more opportunity for change.
Sure. Let me allow you to go first and then I'll... Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. We've got two types of electoral systems in South Africa.
Yes.
The one which is first past the post, majoritarian type of election. That would speak to... Just to put it simply, the winner takes it all. It will speak to, given the number of candidates who are contesting, the one that is going to get the most or the highest number, that is the person who has won that election. And it will predominantly speak to your ward councillors. That's the system that we use. And previously, before the amendments, that would speak to even independent candidates. Now, the other system is the proportional representation.
Yes.
And previously, this system was actually meant for an election that would speak to political parties or representatives from political parties. It would then exclude the independent candidates.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, given the amendments, now the independent candidates are now going to be included in the proportional representation. Now, somehow it would speak to voting to an individual, because independent candidates come as themselves. They don't necessarily come from the political parties. And they then contest with candidates that are coming from political parties. Now, in a way, let me also go back. Then there was a ruling that system, the PR system itself, given that it excludes the independent candidates, that is discriminatory. It does not necessarily, allow people to be involved in the whole process of elections or in the whole process of voting. Now they are included. This is going to afford the voters to either choose an independent candidate as a person or choose a representative or a candidate that comes to a party. Now the advantage of this is that you then choose a person that you know that will not necessarily have the constitution, the political party constitution at heart, having to promote the political constitution, but this person would look at the interest of us as the people, and secondary to the political party constitution, as opposed to you have representatives from political parties, obviously. In their mind, in terms of the mandates that they get from the political parties, that firstly put the priority into the political party constitution.
Yeah, and then what kind of qualifying criteria does an independent, from an IEC perspective, what is the qualifying criteria that an independent needs to have?
Two scenarios. If an independent candidate has got to contest for a ward, because yes, we forever have by-elections, by the way, that person will need to get sort of a petition, or we provide them with forms where they're going to get to collect about 50 signatures at ward level. 50 signatures of the people who are registered in that particular ward that they want to contest in. But the law requires that the person should reside in the municipality but can contest in the ward that is affected. And all those 50 people must be registered in the ward that is affected. Past that. With this national and provincial election, an independent would then need to have 9,000 signatures that is provincial, not confined to a ward, but in the whole province.
Okay.
Yes. And these people must obviously be registered within the ward. But over and above that, an independent candidate will then have to pay a fee that for them to contest.
Yeah.
To be part of the contestation
so
for
it's
that
quite
level.
a thing. You have to basically earn your stripes and be, very serious about your political
Indeed,
career.
and not only that, but you will also need to campaign. Remember, that you need to be known, you need to be paying, you need to do some activations.
And you go by your personal name. I'm Leanne running for. You can do that. Okay. Okay. Lorato, what are the problems that the previous system caused? And how will this amendment that allows people to run as independents, what kind of change will that bring?
So, allow me to problematize the current act. Firstly, as the Rivonia Cycle, we are against the law as it is now.
Okay.
We were part of the civil society formations that won when the New Nation movement had won the Constitutional Court challenge. We had made substantive input in Parliament throughout the public participation process.
Yeah.
Out of that, there were two reports from the committee that the Minister of Home Affairs had put together, the minority report and the majority report.
Okay.
In his wisdom, the minister chose the minority report.
Okay.
The minority report, by the way, benefits the current political parties.
Yes.
Right? And this is how. So for instance, she's spoken about, so now you are Lorato, I've canvassed and I'm now on my way to Parliament.
Yes.
But here's the trick, right? If I'm a political party and I win enough seats, because of the list system, I can literally allocate a number of people to take up those positions.
Yeah.
But as Lorato, if I've won a lot more seats or a lot more votes, I forfeit the other seats, the other votes so I can only
you can only be Lorato.
Take for my one seat, right? So even if I was more popular than even the dominant political party or the second biggest or whichever other party, it again you see where now the disadvantage is.
Yes.
And for some reason they see wisdom in that to say, but you campaigned as Lorato, therefore there's no way that you can then look for a few other people to come and coalesce with you. But if you think about this political reimagination that we're talking about, think about Zaki Ahmad, for instance. We know him as a treatment action campaign, AIDS activist.
Yes.
And now he may be campaigning as an individual.
Yeah,
but we also know that there's a coalition around him where he could mobilize and allocate for those votes.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, so it's almost
because
that kind
you
of
need the influence. You see, I proved I have the influence.
Yeah.
I'm in Parliament now, but yet you've taken away my seats, which
Absolutely.
takes away my representation, which means that I can't give effect to the people that have put me here.
You know what? The thing with, I hear this a lot among my peers. There's all these nice buzzwords that we throw around. And in theory, we are speaking about a utopia where in practice we are living in a dystopia. And we hear all these nice things. This is what you should do. You have your voice heard, keep people responsible, your ward councillors. And there's education. Like you were saying, nobody is oblivious to the fact that these are the processes. Many people know the processes. Many of my peers are voting. They are voting, but they still are frustrated with the way things are the way we see things happening. And my issue with the independent candidates, and this is my fear, and it's sad to say that I'm constantly in a state of fear. It's like we are a traumatized nation. That's definitely what we are. Because now I'm thinking independent candidates, they've got good virtue going into this, but won't the system corrupt them? And that is what most of us are sitting with. And that's the reason why we have no trust in anybody. And somebody in the comment section is actually saying this. He says here that these are all nice words to say, keep them responsible, make your voice heard. We all know this, but we also know that the country has been so institutionalized to the dysfunction. It's now at the point where people are stopping at green robots because they are so used to the fact that there is no longer electricity in our country or there's cable theft. And you were alluding to it earlier where you were saying that, government has become so complacent. This is how we look at it, that they've become so complacent with the dysfunction and the fact that other people are going to step in, like independents, where we have now guys who are not qualified as traffic officers, controlling the traffic. And we are handing it,
who may be stoned, by the way.
Exactly, and it's like we literally we are happy with the bare minimum. This is where we are at, and it's a sad reality. And I don't even have a question anymore. It's just that, airing my frustration with what most of the people are sitting with, what most of South Africa.
But you see, what I'm saying was that we are our own biggest problems. We created this. There was an expectation that once we pay our taxes and once we vote, you guys are going to do the stuff that we're going to do. So now we're on the flip side of that, where that wasn't enough. And you do say that. You say that in another article you wrote for News 24. It says, all citizens must be deeply worried about bad governance as a result of corruption because it means that our country is gradually sinking into a dark pit. So the thing is that we must stop this savior mentality. We believe that someone is going to come and save us. If your lawn is, if your grass is growing, you have to cut it yourself. That is the type of responsibility that you need to start taking, firstly for your house, then for your street, then for the block around you, and then for the community around you. And this is what the conversation is to those who are listening. It is reminding you that you are meant to empower yourself. So the IEC is saying, we've got an organization, this is what we do, we are seeing what we are seeing, there are tons of people that are not voting, we are putting all these efforts into it. Lorato is saying, yes, she's doing all the stuff, but that's not enough. You have to have a voice that speaks to results, and you have to feed back and say, this thing that you are doing is not working. Now, then we get little handouts, which is the amendment bill, as far as I can understand from your perspective, is that you've done a little, but not enough to give us what it is that we are in need of. We are in need for, and that's the thing, is we can't keep putting the responsibility on the political parties because they are proven to be irresponsible. What we do have to be is active citizens. Yes. Active citizens. Yes. So for those people, like yourself, in your introduction, you said that when I am not paid, I am the chairman of the Rivonia Cycle, which means that it's an initiative from your heart. It means that it's come from a place where you are also fed up and you have to do something, and this is what you are doing. And it does happen that people have to pick up the costs, which they don't want to, take out the time, which is a sacrifice and is difficult. But this is what we must change, South Africans, is that we can no longer sit down. Your time is up. You need to vote, you need to educate your household, you need to get your children on the voters roll, you need to hurry up so they can turn 18 quickly. You need to do what you need to do from your perspective, because you can no longer sit.
No, absolutely.
You can no longer sit.
But I guess importantly as well, recognize that we engage differently. Yes. So for instance, in where I live, I know a few of my neighbors, but I connect with them because we're in a WhatsApp group together. We have we have many common concerns. Safety is one of those. So whenever, there's what we call jumpers who would have jumped into one house, there would be an alert and there would be, either police alerted. So there's a camaraderie of some sort through this digital community. Yes. Although we are disconnected in the sense that, I can't even point.
Together,
right. And then go to my parents' home in Harango, which is just 100 kilometers away from where I live, right? Yeah. They then, show a sense of community in a different way. Yes. For instance, dealing with the Nyaope people, there's almost a sense of how do we get together to help this kid? Because when he was growing up, we know that he comes from a good family, but we can't we can't allow him to be continuing to breaking into our own homes, but also will not just hand him to the police because that is not the solution, right? They find a community way of doing that. You then go to my grandparents' place, which is in the rural areas where the funerals are a very important place where counselors at the end of every funeral, they would stand and make a community announcement. So I'm just demonstrating that these different kinds of modes of communication, they should not only then be one way. Because the one-way communication then makes us passive, right? There's a need for how do we ensure that we make communication interactive. But most importantly, and this is the last one again on communication, one of the things that we had seen, when AIDS was a pandemic in South Africa, you had Komanani, which was a big campaign. You had Soul City, which was a big campaign. You had Love Life, which was a big campaign. All of them targeting different, audiences and the likes. And they achieved their objectives. And then there was defunding of those programs. Now, when the Minister of Health was at an AIDS conference, I think it was in Canada, he indicated that in South Africa, adolescent girls and young women there's an increase of them contracting HIV and AIDS. And it shows that when you stop communication, when you stop engaging with people, the behavior also demonstrates that. So we need an always-on kind of communication. And I guess the challenge to the IEC is that when they are defunded, right, it therefore means that they can't run the programs that they ought to run.
Who are you funded by, IEC?
We get funding from the Department of Home Affairs. The Treasury give money to Home Affairs, and part of the money comes to the IEC.
Okay.
So there's no direct money that comes to us in terms of
taxes or anything.
Of taxes.
Okay, and that's what you were talking about, is that there's a delicate balance. So it's like they are a nice department to keep in check because you can just defund them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've seen it happen in many instances. For instance, you look at before Dr. Pali Lohotla left Statistics SA, he was starting to be vocal to say, there is no point that we collect all of this information, data and stats. We share them with you, but you are not utilizing it. And then, continuously, the money was just being squeezed out of that department, and he has left, and he continues to make that point.
No, that is something because, like you say, we are organization, we're operating, we're doing the most. We're doing the most. We're getting primary school kids up here voting, and like you can say, there's a point where you just can't go further than that.
Sorry, and before you go on, Lorato, you spoke earlier about entering the digital space because that's where we are now, especially with the younger generation.
It's not where we are, it's where we live.
It's where we live now. But a lot of the times you hear this thing where we have the headline generation, and they only read headlines and they only read small snippets of information, and they don't go and read every the article in context, for instance. So how would we counteract that in order because a lot of people are ignorant and ignorantly bliss. They don't know how the processes work. They don't want to know how the processes work. They want to hear what their peers are saying in a tweet of 140 characters, and that's it, right? But 140 characters is not going to be sufficient to give you the sufficient information that you need to go and be a responsible citizen, to practice responsible democracy, like you mentioned earlier. So how would you then counteract that? How would you countermeasure that? I know that Rivonia Cycle does a lot of these things, but how do you encourage younger people to get involved in having full-scale conversations?
Importantly, tap to the things that they care about, right? So with the Democracy Builder program, we were in a community in Sterkspruit in the Eastern Cape. There are only two major employers in Sterkspruit. One, it is retail. Two is government, right? And you can imagine there's only one shop, right, and finite jobs, even with government, very finite. So you can smell poverty as you walk into that town, right? And so at the end of our Democracy Builder project, there would be a small project where people must now come together and say, this is a problem that we're going to solve for. Interestingly, it's a rural town as well. These young people got together and they said, we want to solve for, we want to create an awareness campaign on on violence on queer people. I was shocked. I'm saying, in this rural town, I thought you guys would be solving for hunger, you'll be going some food garden.
You're worried about.
Right? But you realize that oftentimes people come in with already held solutions. So I want to talk to you about the things that I want to talk to you about. And I don't ask, so what is it that you're interested in? if you're interested in fighting for the queer community, to have their rights preserved, for them to be accepted in communities, how do I support you? And in supporting you, how do I then start having civic conversations with you?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you pull them in with their interests.
Absolutely.
And then you mobilize them with their actual concerns.
Yes.
That they need to have.
I think that's actually how things should be done, because now is the time for us to address the needs of the people and not what we think they do need, and that is one of the ways that we also engage our communities in. We sometimes take it for granted that people know that there's elections and they just have to vote. But we also need to marry that with them understanding the importance of having to vote and what is it that they're getting themselves into,
that's a good one. What are you getting yourself into?
And as the IEC, indeed, we somehow try and apply different approaches that will speak to digital platforms and as well as contacts, because we somehow try to accommodate people that have and the people that may not have access to that type of technology. And we do them by way of organizing interventions, where we go to either organized entities or even not organized entities. We go to schools, we go to the streets, we go to old age homes, we go to churches, we go to all constituencies and begin to address their questions that relate to what happens within the IEC, but also conscientize them with regards to what is the next election about as compared to the previous election that they might have engaged in. And most importantly, galvanize the youth, not disenfranchised, but disgruntled young people in having to participate in election. We have the IEC WhatsApp number, which is 06080000. Now, if you tap into that, it would give you different options. Whatever topic that you want to talk about, candidates, what the IEC does.
I think that's a good one. Perhaps our producer can just help us put that number on. If you can just say that again for us, it is 060 yes
088
yes
0000.
00. So you can interact with this line. And you can go on and you can see there's a host of options and solutions.
Exactly. It would give you one, then it identifies the topic 1, 2, 3. The topics are numbered and they're indicated there.
Yes.
Then you choose whatever that you want to talk about. You send one. Then you interact with it. It actually outlines what you actually are needing to know at that point in time.
No, that's very
but
useful.
We also have our Facebook, of course, we've got Twitter, and we also have open lines. We've got local
tell
offices.
Me you've got a TikTok, because that would have gone down. It's very sweet. But I don't want to cut into your word. It's just that we've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to allow Leandra just to go through any last comments. And then if there are some questions, perhaps you guys can just field it in the few minutes that we have left.
Okay, I'd just like to acknowledge everybody that is watching. We've got Zara Alpa here. She was saying good morning. And then we've got Gail. Is it Gail Brielli? And then we've got Paul Gonzalez. I think that's a familiar face, Leanne, for you. And then we've got Tumisang Moraperi. And then he asks the question, or she asks the question, why are coalition governments failing? And what could be going wrong? So that's the only question that we have there.
Okay, that's a good one. We'll try and sneak that in for Lorato. But I think just as closing remarks, I like the fact that you shared that contact number, because it allows people to have at least a point of contact and a way of, getting into the game as far as the information that is available there to them. And then, Lorato, we have a question there. But before we do that, I just wanted to maybe, if you can conclude on when is our next elections? What should people be doing right now as active citizens, as becoming responsible citizens? If you could just share a minute and tell people what is your next, what do they need to do, and then we'll move over for closing remarks to Lorato.
Our next elections are going to be our national and provincial elections 2024, and we envisage them to take place somewhere between May and August. The people in the meantime, what is important for them is that they need to update. Those who have not registered, of course, are afforded a chance to register. If you are a first-time voter, you can register online. You download our app, and then you're able to register at your comfort. Or you can go to our local offices. We've got local offices throughout the city, all over, in fact, where you are. We also have a website where people can, in the meantime, update the addresses. If you've moved addresses, you've changed addresses, it is very important that you change, you update that into our website.
And we can do this all on the IEC website.
Website, yes, indeed, in preparation for the next coming elections.
That's good. And in the same kind of advice, Lorato, more from a political perspective, if people, you get the bigger parties that are more advertised. What do you say to a person who hasn't really been engaged in politics? How do they go about finding a good place for their vote?
One of the things that generally political parties would do is that they would have manifestos,
yes.
right? And it's reams and reams of paper.
Yeah.
You're speaking about, the soundbite, tweet generation. So it therefore means that you are going to miss a whole lot of those people. One of the things that we try and advise is to say, if there's a party that you're interested in, at least check in with them on a regular basis. So if you think about it, and I'm not even advocating for the EFF, or am I an EFF member or supporter or sympathizer, they host regular YouTube sessions on, I think it's every Friday or something like that. They have something like EFF Fridays, right? And it's one way of really connecting into, so what are you about? I hear that you want us to grab land. And then people then get, oh, you're not saying grab land like grab land.
Yeah.
You mean something different. So it's almost that kind of a thing where be in tune with whoever interests you, whether it's, Bosa from Musi or Rise Mzansi or any other. It's that important that just tune in. Just like, we do church. The reason we go to church every Sunday, it is because there's something that we want to tap into, that I have enough mileage from Monday to the next Sunday, right? It's not that God does not exist during the week, nor am I looking for God at church. So it's almost that kind of behavior that we need to, it must be part of the political culture. We need to be connected on a regular basis. And on the question of coalitions, I wrote a piece 2 weeks ago in the Sunday Times, and it was titled, "We need politicians to just stop being childish."
Just like that.
Just like that, right? They need to grow up. And the example that I used was in 1994, just before 1994, the country was almost in flames.
Yeah.
Particularly if you think about KZN. KZN, by the way, after the 1994 elections, it was not won by an outright majority.
Yeah.
Right? It was a coalition between the ANC and the IFP. Right? And those were the two parties that were warring at the time. And the adults in the room stood up in Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Nelson Mandela to say, this is not going to be the ground for a civil war.
Yeah.
We need to make this, and they made it work.
Yeah.
Right? So it's almost that kind of a thing where you need people in the city of Johannesburg to say, we must stop being childish. Right? There's work that needs to be done. Let's just get on with the job.
Yeah, but they're very worried about their pockets.
No, absolutely. Sadly.
Childish people with lots of money. Well, we have reached the end of our Politics 101. There was so much more that we wanted to discuss. There's some of the frameworks where we wanted to speak to the IEC more about, how is Parliament set up? How many seats are there? How is the allocations working? And I think perhaps on another occasion we can pick up that conversation because it's very useful, because it helps it helps you see what actually happens with your vote. And then to our guests, thank you so much for being so gracious with your knowledge, your time, your expertise. I'm so glad that you fight well. And you step on toes lightly, and you acquiesce in such a ladylike manner. Thank you so much. And always the fire that comes from Leandra. Thank you for being such a wonderful spokesperson, especially for the youth. And to South Africans, stop being childish, you have heard. And do the responsible thing. And not only you, but become an active advocate for responsibility. If your mother is not voting, your father's not voting, your husband's indifferent, start campaigning in your own house.
Yes.
Because you are the one that are fielding all the complaints about potholes and how things are not working. Change your speech. Flip it around so that it works for you. Do what you need to do. And yes, it will require a little bit of effort, but down the line, it is worth it. I like what the leader of, what is his name again? He goes around feeding people. I like what he says.
Gift of the givers.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Imtiaz Suleiman.
Thank you. It just slipped my mouth. But what I was going to say was that I like the way he said, and so many people have said it, but I was quoting it from, hearing it from him, is that the government is behaving as if the country is theirs, but it is not. The country is ours. So if we can be much more active in our citizenry and much more responsible, we would go a long way to making tomorrow a better place for us. Yes. So thank you for being part of the Inside Show. To my faves, Violet and Joan, kisses to you, and thank you to everyone from the Insides team. God bless and take care.
In the shed, as I look upon my life, in the shed, there's a passion inside. Heaven knows I'm living my dream.